So a few weeks ago, I reached out to some friends and some colleagues, and I asked them a question. I said, if you could have a therapist talk to you about, if you could ask a therapist any question and have them record a video answering that question, what would that question be, or what would the area of interest be? And I got quite a lot of results, quite a lot of responses. But the first one came face to face from a coworker who asked the following: how do I find a good therapist? Um, and to answer that question, I'm going to reverse it a little bit. I'm going to talk about a good therapist and then how to find them. Um, no matter what anyone says, no matter what theoretical orientation the therapist practices, no matter how many years they've been in practice, none of that really matters. Um, it does, but it doesn't really matter. What matters is the therapeutic alliance that is formed between you and your therapist. What does that mean? It simply means, do you feel a bond or connection with your therapist? And if you do, that is probably a good therapist for you. I would add, as a therapist, that probably the other thing you want to look for after you've found this connection with this person, this therapeutic alliance, is whether or not that therapist is really challenging you and pushing you towards the goals that you both establish in therapy. Um, I don't mean to imply that they're pushy. I don't mean to imply that they're controlling or domineering. Clients always direct the therapeutic process, but you should feel challenged by your therapist. You should feel like your therapist is asking you to do things that are difficult, because therapy is about changing how you think and how you behave to reach different emotional outcomes. So, are you being challenged by your therapist? I think is a reasonable rubric by which to gauge whether or not this is a quote good therapist. So, number one, therapeutic alliance matters more than anything. All the research indicates that that is the number one predictor about whether or not someone's going to be successful in therapy. Number two, in that therapy, are you feeling as though you are challenged? So now let's focus a little bit on how to find said therapist. Um, this may be a little controversial, but I think that if you happen to know somebody that's in therapy and they happen to tell you that they are making progress in therapy, I don't see anything wrong with asking them for their therapist's name. There are some challenges in that kind of approach, in that um, I don't necessarily recommend chasing down everybody in your friend group and asking them whether or not they're in therapy and who their therapist is. I'm just saying, if you happen to know somebody that's making progress in therapy, then perhaps, ask your friend who that therapist is. And the other potential challenge here is that that therapist may decline to take you, not because of you, but because they already have a relationship with your friend. That it isn't prohibited, and it's up to the individual therapist as to what they believe they can handle. But a lot of therapists will get worried about, you know, accidentally revealing things from one friend to another, or they may just decide, perhaps this just isn't for me, and they may decline. But I would still ask, because if your friend is making progress and has a strong therapeutic connection with that therapist, then maybe you will too. And if that therapist is open to it, then it's worth it. But that's kind of a Hail Mary. You may or may not know anybody that is in therapy. That's just a starting point. I would say the number two thing that I would do is head on out to a lot of these therapy aggregator sites. What I mean by that is Psychology Today, Good Therapy, findatherapist.com, mentalhealthmatch.com. These are all websites that therapists can list themselves on, and usually they include a profile picture, they include theoretical orientation, they include bullets about the types of issues that therapist feels that they're proficient in treating, and you can kind of study up on and find a therapist that you think would be good for you. I think one of the challenges with those websites is that Oftentimes those providers don't take insurance, and that's probably a huge challenge to many people that are looking for mental health treatment is, does this therapist take my insurance? And a lot of therapists don't, because by the time they get done with all the hassle of medical billing, they don't make very much money. And so a lot of those types of therapists can be found out on the websites that I mentioned. But don't let that discourage you from going out there and looking, because there are therapists out there that definitely do take insurance, and that's something that you may find one that's right for you out there. The other place I would look if you do have insurance is via your insurance provider's website. So you can log into your insurance provider's website and put in your zip code and search for therapists that take your insurance on your insurance provider's website. So that's another method you can find to, if the primary issue for you is finding a therapist that takes your insurance, that's a reasonable way to go about doing it, is searching via your via your insurance provider's website. The next thing I would do is to find a good therapist is, let's imagine that you found a therapist, or you've somehow heard of a therapist through the grapevine. You've just found somebody that you think might be a good match. The next thing that I would do is double check and make sure that that person is licensed to practice mental health treatment in the state in which you reside. This is a big deal. There are a lot of people out there with good intentions that want to help others, that maybe don't want to put in the many years of study and work it takes to get your education, and then the many years of subsequent supervised work that you have to undergo to elevate your license from a associate level license to a professional independent level license. It's a lot of work to become a fully licensed mental health therapist, and it is unfortunately very problematic for people who are not licensed to practice mental health treatment. They can really do some harm and some damage. So your state will have a method for you to check whether or not the person that you're looking at has an active license. I think that's incredibly important. Take the extra, I will put some links in the description below to the Arizona method of doing that. But your mileage may vary depending on what state you're in, and I think it's incredibly important that you find out for sure that the person that you're going to go see is licensed to practice mental health treatment. Next thing I talk about is, you're going to see a lot of, when you're out perhaps on Psychology Today, or you're looking on your insurance provider's website, and you're maybe you just heard through word of mouth, whatever, and this person is a licensed mental health therapist, or someone who's licensed to provide mental health treatment, the next thing you're going to see is a whole bunch of acronyms. And I thought it would be worthwhile to explain what some of those acronyms mean, because it can get very confusing, and people can often wonder, well, which acronym person is right for me? I don't know. So the truth is, going back to that number one point, the Therapeutic Alliance is really what matters the most. As long as they're licensed and you feel like you have a strong therapeutic bond with that therapist, that's the right therapist for you. You shouldn't really have to care too much about those licenses, but I thought for completeness sake, I'll explain to you what those licenses are. So you start at the top with those folks who have got doctorates, and you will see PhDs, obviously, but you will also see something called a PsyD. What is the difference between those? A PhD is someone whose education focused primarily on research, and a PsyD is someone whose education focused primarily on clinical work, that is, working with human beings in treatment centers, stuff like that. You might believe, oh, well, the PsyD is better, but truthfully, either of those folks is very well qualified to treat you for your mental health issues. The next level down is the sort of master's level, and at this level you have 3 different types of mental health treatment professionals. The first is the licensure that I enjoy, which is the licensed professional counselor, or that's the Arizona name for it, but I'm a counselor. There is a national level organization for counselors, but counselors are essentially master's level clinicians who can treat people for all kinds of mental health disorders. The next one that you might see is LCSW. That's a licensed social worker. Social workers, again, master's level clinician, much like an LPC, they provide mental health treatment. The only real difference between us is not in what we can treat, but in the sort of theoretical orientations of our different professions, which to you that doesn't matter. As long as you have someone who's licensed and have a strong therapeutic bond with, I'm merely providing the explanation of what these acronyms are. So you've got LPC, which is a licensed professional counselor, LCSW, which is a social worker, and finally you might see LISAC, which this might actually be important because if your issue is substance abuse, LISACs are focused primarily on substance abuse treatment. And finally, I think what I'd say is that I know I spent a lot of this video saying that the most important thing is the Therapeutic Alliance between you and your therapist, and the rest of it is kind of academic, which is true, but I think I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that there are different theoretical orientations. Now, what does that mean? That means that the practitioner, regardless of what type of license they have, regardless of their education, has chosen a particular theoretical view of how to treat people for mental health issues. So what a lot of folks are familiar with is the psychoanalytic approach, because they're familiar with seeing that on TV, where folks lay on a couch and the therapist doesn't say much and sits behind them with a pad of paper and scribbles on it as they free associate and talk about things, hopefully drawing them out of their subconscious. So that's one particular theoretical orientation. But I think it's important to point out that there is a particular theoretical orientation that seems to have been researched quite a lot and has an enormous amount of supportive data to it, and that is cognitive behavioral theory or cognitive behavioral therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy, in a nutshell, seeks to address habits of thought to produce different emotional outcomes. So I personally would look for someone who is practicing from a cognitive behavioral orientation. However, that is not the number one criteria. It is simply a nice to have. The number one criteria is Therapeutic Alliance, and are they licensed or not? If you have that, you've got most of the battle won. So hopefully that was helpful, and please let me know in the comments below if you think I left anything out, or if you think if you have any other different opinions. I'd love to hear them. All right, thanks.